We have, the next kind of speaker in our progression here. We started talking last week about the value of liberal arts, right? Remember, Dr. Pasquale was here. He shared why it's so important that you chose to come to a liberal arts education institution. All of the possible positive outcomes from that experience of the variety of classes that you'll take here. So we want to build on that with today's topic. We have Dr. Matt Bonzo here with us. He's a professor of philosophy, and he's been at Cornerstone 20-ish years, a little over 20 years. We have lots of fun facts about Dr. Bonzo. First of all, he's in his spare time, he runs a farm. He provides fruit and vegetables for over 30 families and also a restaurant. He told me that the concept of worldview changed his life, and that in his time here, he has worked with over 100 students who have gone on, 100 philosophy majors who have gone on to study in graduate school, which is just a really exciting thing for me to know that. I was glad he shared that fact with me. I thought that was great to know that we have a lot of students here who have studied this idea about philosophy, figured out why it's important, and then been able to take that out after their time here at Cornerstone and build on that with further education. So Dr. Bonzo is going to start our conversation today on the topic of worldview. We're going to build on this again next week and look even further into the details, talking about Christian worldview. But today, the big picture of worldview, so he's going to come up. Hopefully, he'll share with us why this changed his life, and we'll get you started on this conversation about the importance of a worldview.
Maybe. Oh, there we go. So thank you for spending 17 minutes with me. I would usually start with some jokes, but I only have 17 minutes, so I got to get cracking. I don't know how many of you know much about D-Day. You've probably, if you're a history buff, you've heard about it or read about it. Some of your grandfathers, great-grandfathers were probably there even. But D-Day, right, was the day in which the Allied troops invade France in World War II. And if you know anything about it, you realize what a risky proposition it was, because they had to come in on beaches, and above the beaches on the bluff, there were all kind of German encampments, right? And they were dug in pretty well. They had all kind of big guns to fire down at them on the beach. And when the American troops, the Allied troops went in, they knew it was going to be a messy day, right? A bloody day, which it turned out to be. Thousands upon thousands of young men died, and thousands upon thousands were injured. And it's actually the injury, or those who are injured, I want to talk about to get us in to thinking about worldview. Because they did this study among troops that were injured on that day regarding how much morphine they needed. So when you came on the beach, right, if you got hit by bullets or by a shell, there's nowhere for you to go. You can't go back to the ship. You can't go forward. You simply had to lay there. You hope a corpsman came along. Depending on how injured you were, you took a shot of morphine. Morphine usually lasts somewhere between 6 and 8 hours for these kinds of injuries, according to research. On this day, it lasted well beyond that. So these soldiers, as they lay there, right, with these wounds, they didn't need another hit of morphine, sometimes for up to 16 to 24 hours. An incredible stretch. They compared this with other injuries that people may have received at certain points when they were given morphine. And there they would need it or want it after 6 to 8 hours. And they asked the question, what's the difference? Why can soldiers on this beach extend their pain level, right, their tolerance of pain, for such a long time when someone who's robbed a bank and been shot by the police wants morphine pretty quickly soon thereafter, after the original shot? And what they discovered was it's actually the narrative that one told oneself that changed how you experienced the pain. If you think about D-Day, right, these guys are all believing in this, we have to go save civilization in Europe. They've been told a narrative, a story, which gives them a kind of heroic action that they're taking. Within the context of that heroic action, they were able to tolerate the pain for a much longer time. Whereas if you had robbed a bank and been shot, clearly not heroic, right? Maybe even a bit guilt-inducing. And because of the narrative attached to you with the guilt involved in it, it shrunk your tolerance of pain. What in the world's that got to do with worldview? What I want to really stress to you today is that worldview is not simply a set of right answers. It's not merely a kind of conceptual checklist that you have to go through and you hope to get right. Right? When we're talking about worldview, we're talking about what kind of grand narrative defines your life. What kind of story gives your life unity? What kind of story gives your life orientation? What kind of story tells you who you are? We see the power, right, of narrative. We're not reducible down to just a bunch of biological junk thrown together. There's something about us as humans that live life in a bigger way because we have this ability to find our identity in the stories that we live individually and corporately together. So here's an easy definition for worldview. It comes from Al Walters in a book called Creation Regained. A worldview is a comprehensive framework of basic beliefs. And I'm simply going to walk through those terms to get at the way in which worldviews operate. So a worldview is comprehensive. It's all-encompassing, right? That's why we have the word world there. It means nothing falls outside the parameter of what's being considered in a worldview. A worldview takes in the total big picture, right? So when you're trying to make sense of your life, you don't want to simply make sense of some small part of your life, but ultimately you want your life to make sense in a whole, right? Within the whole of reality. So it's comprehensive. It's also a framework. This is a very important part, that the basic beliefs that you have about reality need to connect with one another. One of the problems that we see quite often today, right, is we have fragmented stories. We have fragmented beliefs. That is, they're disconnected from one another. They don't hold together very well. And the picture of the framework, I think, is helpful here. If you've ever built a house or built some kind of building, you build the frame, right? So you have a foundation. On top of that foundation now, you're constructing the framework. One of the important things about framing a house or a building is that you never leave a wall standing by itself. That when you frame, you always want to make the connections. That's how the house and the wall gets its strength. If you simply build one wall out there by itself, the first big wind that comes along is going to topple it, right? It's by connecting these walls that you get the kind of strength and support from the other parts that hold it together. That's true of worldview. That if you have simply a bunch of incoherent beliefs that have no real link to them, and they don't really form a narrative unity of life, right? An overarching story in which you play a part. If you simply have little partial stories, it's going to be hard for you to hold together some sense of identity in life. When that first tragedy comes along, when that first event that makes you really question, do I believe this? If you're fragmented and not connected, it's much easier for it to fall apart. Much easier for you to question it and dismiss it. So one of the things that we challenge you to do during your 4 years here at Cornerstone is really analyze and bring forward your worldview, right? It's not that you're not critical about them. It's exactly what you should be, is critical about them. And one of the questions you need to ask, of the things I believe, how coherent are they? How well do they fit together? And be honest with yourself. Don't simply look at it as you think it should be. These are the right answers I was told in Sunday school. But how do you actually live? Would your story sustain you through a time of questioning, a time of pain even, the way in which the soldiers' story sustained them. Right? Because here's one thing we know for sure. All of us are going to face some kind of trial and tribulation in our life. Many of us already have. And it's easy for that to kind of undermine and destroy what we're trying to live for simply because we haven't done the work of putting together our worldview. So it's a comprehensive framework of basic beliefs. It's this big picture, the parts of which link together, connect together. What do we mean by basic beliefs? Again, sometimes we hear the word belief as simply a kind of passive thing that somebody says or writes, and we take it and accept it. Biblically speaking, belief always has to do with more action than that. Believing is a living out of what you hold to be true. So when we're talking about basic beliefs, we're not talking about you believe that vanilla ice cream is better than chocolate ice cream. We're not talking about beliefs that turkeys are smarter than chickens, right? We're talking about these kind of fundamental beliefs that, again, give us some orientation in life, some sense of purpose, some direction that we're taking with our life. So I have 4 of them up there that most worldviews answer all 4 of these. First one is, what does it really mean to be human? Right? So different worldviews have different answers on this question, but they all try to describe what is it that we humans are, what sets us apart, if anything. If you go into a good naturalistic, reductionistic worldview now, right, one that simply says all we are a collection of atoms that have evolved to this state, then they're going to say something like this: there's nothing really unique about being human, right? To be human is simply to be kind of the most developed part of biological life right now. Or if you're a good pantheist who thinks everything is God, then what are you as human? You're just some form of the Godhead. Or as we're going to talk about next week, if you're a Christian, there are certain phrases that capture what it means to be a human biblically, such as image bearer. Right? There seems to be something unique about us as humans in our story, in the story that we believe in. So one question that worldviews all answer is, what's it mean to be human? Second one is, what's the nature of reality, ultimately? Do you live in this cold, careless world that's nothing but a collection of physical parts? Or is this world designed by love in which your being makes sense? Which fundamental story do you live by? Which fundamental story directs how you behave? Third question, where's this all headed? Right? So where's it all going? Is it just one big cycle that we're stuck in, that you just go through, right? You're recycling, reincarnated over and over. You can never really get out of it. Is it going nowhere, really? If it was an accident in the beginning, is it just a series of accidents until we cease to exist, the sun blows up, kaboom? Or is it headed towards some kind of completion or fulfillment? And each of those stories then determine what kind of identity that we have, right? What kind of sense of meaning and purpose that you have in your life. If it's all just meaningless, then guess what? Your life's pretty meaningless too. But if there's a fundamental story that's guiding reality itself, the question becomes, how does your story fit into that bigger story? All worldviews answer where this is all going, right? They all give us some sense of this narrative unity of life that holds together and moves us in some direction. Fourth question that we have up there that all worldviews address is, what time is it? Not time in terms of clock, but in the developing unfolding of this story, where are we at? You know, if it started billions and billions of years ago and it's going to end in a billion years into the future, does that tell us anything to say we're right in the middle of it? or if you think that it's a slow realization of the divinity of the world, where are we at in the development of that divinity? Or if you think about creation, fall, redemption, consummation, the biblical worldview, where are we at in that time scale? Where you're at helps to determine what you should be doing, right? If you don't know what time it is for creation itself, you're always going to be disoriented. You're not going to be able to put the story together in any kind of meaningful way. So all worldviews attempt to tell us what it means to be human. Why are we unique if we are? What's the nature of the world that you find yourself in? What's it all about? Where's it all headed? What should we do about it? And then, are we making progress or not? I apologize to some of you 211 students for using this example again. Here's what worldview really means, right? Getting back to this notion of narrative, this unity, which then guides life. And it's not just checking off the belief system. One of the activities that distinguished the earliest church in Rome was adoption. The worldview of the Romans at that time understood that any kind of deformation, any kind of malformation of the child made that child worthless, right? And often what they would do in response to that is to simply let the child die. Put him on the outskirts of the city. This child can never become really human. It's not worth anything. Let's get rid of it. Christians came along, and because of their worldview, began to adopt those children. So the way in which Christianity began to distinguish itself against the backdrop of other worldviews was not that everybody had the right answer in their pocket and simply went up to the local Roman and said, here are my 5 worldview answers. See? It'd be great to do that, maybe. But the real witness of the early church and the continued witness of today's church is not just that you can articulate it, but that you can live it, right? So one of the things we do here at Cornerstone is called the Virtue Project. And the Virtue Project is this reminder that the Christian faith is not a head faith. The Christian faith is not that you have all the right answers. The Christian faith is a faith that's lived into the world as a witness to the life-giving presence of God through Christ and His Spirit. Do you live that way? So at the end of the day, it's not a test that you have to pass, right? It's not, can you give the right definition? It may be important for this class that you pass that. But at the end of the day, the real question is, does your life suggest some kind of narrative unity that holds together in the face of tragedy? Is someone who's going through some kind of suffering right now able to look at your life and say, that's what I need? Because they seem to be able to hold it together in ways that I can't even imagine. Thank you.